And off we go. Deborah, how would you like to start?
Well, now Jo is torturing me here. I just want you to know this, because actually, because she's in the office and we've got it set up there, she's got the slides under control. So
Yeah,
for me
always
not to be in control of my slides is really difficult. But could we please start off with talking about coaching in Belbin coaching terms? So
okay, so I've just shared your slides there, so you'd like me to go to the next slide?
Yes, please. And I'll be looking across to remind myself of which numbers.
There we go.
Okay. By the way, we will be sending you these, so don't worry about making notes and things. But just in broad terms, as so many of you will know anyway, but this is a non-directive form of helping to develop people and for them helping themselves. So this links in so much with the Belbin Reports, where, you know, we're looking at the strengths and the weaknesses. Now, we have these allowable weaknesses, but there's also other non-allowable weaknesses too. And the focus on the future desired behavior, and that's in general terms, but of course, Belbin's a behavioural questionnaire, so it's absolutely bang slap in the middle of what we do. But it's going to be, picking up on what we were talking about just a moment ago, but it's got to be in line with goals. And we're going to be talking specifically, of course, about work goals, because we're talking about coaching through Belbin in a work context here. And of course, helping the person to identify their own resources. So how are they going to be able to make change, and long-term change that actually sticks, but that it's coming from them? So as we're not in the sort of small group where we then have a discussion about these things, let's go on to the next slide if we could, because the key thing we want to get to is the report. Now, this is you as the coach. When you are using your report, you, of course, I'm stating the absolutely, I was about to say a naughty word there, but the blindingly obvious, because it's really important that you have gone through that report in great detail. And that's what we're going to do in a few minutes. And actually, well, even if not in great detail, but look at the pages and what we can really get from them. It's, I think, important that you have, in looking through that, pick up on, you might think, well, I wonder if that's because of that. I wonder if, so hypothesize, that's actually quite useful, but not making assumptions. It's absolutely vital that you're going in, of course, with an absolutely open mind, but make some notes about those things. Have an idea of some of the sorts of areas you want to probe, the questions that you want to ask about. And as we know, really vitally important within a coaching context is mostly to be open questions. And what you're wanting the person to do is to really, often with questions even repeated, but you're just going down more deeply to get to what's really going on there for them. So you are going to then be guiding your client, of course, to make plans that work for them, so that they are doing this. They are then going to take actions, or at least set actions, find their own solutions, and then take the actions. And there's something that I want to add onto this about you as the coach using these. And it's perhaps a broader point, but it's absolutely vital that you have done your own Belbin report. And obviously lots of you will have, certainly lots of people are accredited, but there's others too, and I'm sure that you've done these anyway. But you know, sometimes I come across situations where, with Belbin, but to be honest, with some other things too, where people are asking of others and they're talking about different models or approaches, and they've not actually been through it themselves. You know, it's like taking some sort of exam, but not really having an idea about what it's about. So that is vital, that you've got your own report there and you know yourself. So
I think it's an important one, actually, Deborah, isn't it? There was a great conversation on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, which I know Philip Merry, who's our representative in Singapore, was joining in. The fact that if you're going to be a coach, if you're going to be, you need to almost have been coached yourself. You need to go through that process to really have that empathy and understanding with the other.
Vital, absolutely vital. Now, I wanted to just share with you a little quote that I really like. I'd come across some time ago, and this is: for you to remember, stop working so hard to fix the problem for them. Let them do the work and get the aha moment. And as we all know, if the person comes to that point themselves, or that realization, then yes, the aha, it's something that really matters, that they remember, that it's at the felt sense as well. So it is you to do that guiding, but not to actually do the work. In fact, I think I heard Michael Bungay Stanier being interviewed, and he in fact said, be lazy, you know, it's but meaning that in a positive sense of just not rushing in to do the work. So thank you.
I think that's really important, isn't it? I know Chris Jackson in one of our previous webinars say silence. Silence is so important, isn't it? Don't, if you know the answer, just stop. Let people explore the answer for themselves.
Absolutely. Next slide, please, madam.
Oh, this is cool.
Okay. Now, we're not going to have loads and loads of these slides, by the way. I promise you. It was just that it was the easiest way to get things over in the short space of time. I've already touched on this, that you know about yourself, but given your team roles, then what's your communication style? Is it resource investigator, where you talk a lot, like I'm doing at the moment? Is it the team worker, lots of listening? Is it that you're going in as the implementer and there's a structure to it? So whatever, but just know that, okay, yeah. Just know that the style of communication is going to very much come into these three categories, the social or people elements. Yeah. I'll let Jo, actually, you've got that. You can. Okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the social, the coordinator, team worker, resource investigator, the action, the getting things done, the shaper, completer, finisher, implementer, and then the thinking, the plant, monitor, evaluator, and specialist. It's having that in mind to where you are with those, isn't it, Deborah?
It is. And it's also using that. I mean, do use that quite a bit, really, I would say, in terms of giving feedback and the discussions that you're having around. Could we share screen again, Jo?
We can, but just one
Sorry.
second. It started, the power. Just 1 second, hang on there.
Okay, I can't really think about it.
Okay, Victoria's just added, thank you very much for this, that on being aware of one's own Belbin strengths as a coach, Marshall Goldsmith made the point that whenever he's had a problem as a coach, he's looked into the mirror.
Yes,
it's so important to be aware of our own team role biases, etc., that as coaches we're bringing to the session. So that's interesting, isn't it? Whenever, you know, the amazing Marshall Goldsmith, is it a case of look in the mirror? Is it because of my team roles that's actually perhaps blocked the ability for somebody else to use those? But Deborah, I will now share screen again, and I will go back to your slides.
So what we're saying there, it's this is a little bit, not necessarily that whole sacrifice, team role sacrifice, but are there times when you need to adapt your style a little bit? This is not to say don't be true to yourself. Authenticity, as we know, is absolutely vital, and it's picked up on if you're not being. So this is just saying that there may be times when, because you're aware of your style and that the person you were talking to, that may be quite hard for them. If there's someone who needs quite a bit of time to quietly reflect, and you're going, okay, well, now on to next page and next discussion, that's perhaps not going to be the best thing to do. So it's about that, just being able to adapt a little for yourself and the message. And then now, of course, it will depend on whether people have you've already explained the team roles to them or not. But it's about you using your understanding of their team roles to decide how to communicate with them, but also, hopefully, as we said, using these categories. And once you've explained team roles to your client, then they have that understanding to some degree anyway. They're not going to have the depth of knowledge that you have, but some way of communicating. And as we know, it's useful sometimes to have that language to be able to talk about some issues, but in a slightly depersonalized way, so then you can bring it back into the personal. And I think actually, I'm just looking down on here, but I think that really we're going to have the last slide with words on before we move on to the reports. Now, this is something which, in a way, there's too many words. There shouldn't be lots of words on slides, but
sorry, did you want me to go to click next, Deborah?
Well,
sorry,
yeah, would
I
you?
missed that
and then
cue.
if people want to take
sorry.
a picture of this, but otherwise we're going to send it to them anyway, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Yeah. So really, questions, of course. And well, we originally, when we were talking about this, Joe had said to me, look, can you come up with the specific questions that you ask on each of the pages? Great. But actually, we ended up having the same questions for every page.
Again and again.
Yeah, exactly. They're the core sorts. So we've put these down. I've got a few suggestions here. I'm sure that they're the sorts of things that you use anyway. But for almost every page, you'll be looking at, what are your thoughts about this or your feelings about this, depending on which team role they might be. What do you notice about that bit of information, that bit of information? Tell me anything that surprises you or pleases you or you're delighted by or you're upset by or disappointed by. So these kind of things. And, what insights have you gained from looking at the graph of this or that? What are the learning points? So we're going to be picking up on some particulars on each of the pages rather than me saying each time, these would be questions I'd asked. I think if you can take that as read, these are the sorts of things that you would ask anyway. And then towards the end of the session, of course, it's that reflecting, bringing things together, and then having just other questions. So what development actions do you want to set yourself for? How might you go about achieving these? Do you need other resources? Within what timescale are you going to achieve them? So the sorts of things I say I'm sure that you would do. And I'm actually going to, with all of our tussling back and forth, but I would actually say one of the things that I like that Joe does often at the end of these webinars, in fact, is that you reflect, don't you? You pull, summarize things and pull that and then reflect back. And I think that's so important to do in almost any context, but especially in a coaching context.
Perfect. Thank you, Deborah. Before we go on to the next slide, because my technical ability has left me today, I do apologise. I've been away for too long. I can't seem to get the questions and everything up at the same time as the slides.
Oh yeah,
yes, I'm just going to quickly go and check. Yeah, somebody there has just pointed out how important it is to know the other person's, the person you are coaching, the coachee, their team roles as well, because I should imagine, because I don't do a great deal of coaching. I do coaching within the Belbin team actually, but I don't do a great deal of individual, do team coaching, but not individual coaching. That if you're coaching somebody who is high completed finisher and you know that they're high completed finisher, you're going to need to have the detail, aren't you, to hand?
Absolutely.
Because there's no point, if you're quite a strong coordinator who takes that big sort of broad overlook of things, and somebody asks for the detail and you say, well, that doesn't really fit in, that's not going to be particularly helpful, is it?
It isn't.
So think what sort of evidence or information each of these team roles is going to need.
Most definitely, it's absolutely, that's one of the core things as you go through. So, if you know that monitor evaluators, for example, want to ask lots of questions, and you also know, I've said this before, but you have to take that really seriously. So you know that you need to leave them reflection time, but when they're asking about this, well, why were we even, why have you decided to use Belbin as this approach? I mean, you've got to have thought about all of those things. If you don't have the answer, fine. If you really don't have the answer to something, say that you don't and you get back. So it's certainly that. Also, there are some roles which get bored very easily. So you know that then you need to put in some structure. Thank you. Yes, do that's like the weather. That's
I know it's my vocation.
exactly. Or who frankly, with a completer finisher, if you've given them something and there's an error on something that you've given them, it's like that, almost without meaning to, but you will have lost a little bit of credibility, for example. So yes, we can't emphasize more, any more.
Do your work first. Go in prepared.
That's it. Read their report, and then you've got an idea of the sort of team roles that they are, what combination they are, because that's important too. We're never looking at one single role, but what's come up, and therefore how might you approach the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I will have to keep breaking off to go back to the chat if there are any more questions, or if you've got any comments or observations, or if you think it's pertinent to share one of your experiences as we're going through, that would be fantastic. Okay. Let me go back now, Deborah. Let's have a look at this report, shall we?
What we promised we would do, so we've got to do what it said on the tin. But no, I was just going to say that we promised that we would go through a report.
Yes, we did.
This is about, now if you've got your own reports, you can always use that, but we'll talk about this one in particular. Now, when I said about reading, so it's the next slide,
yes.
Please, Jo.
Sorry, there's a delay.
Oh, sorry. Not that I'm impatient. I don't want you to think that. Okay. We've got this person called Sue Sample, who obviously wasn't really called Sue Sample, but she is someone who fairly recently, actually, that we had done some work with. Well, I say fairly recently, everything seems so strange because it was just before lockdown, but of course,
that was what, 17
ages away now.
Who knows when that was? Yes.
It was the sort of end of last year, and it just seems recently. But she's, if you would like just a tiny bit of background, someone who works for a pharmaceutical company and is working in the regulatory affairs area. So she is someone who is the sort of number two, really. She's senior, she's been there for quite a long time. And when the manager's away, she deputises for the manager. I mean, just not that you needed to know that, but I thought you might like to. So what do we do with these? Now, I always scribble all over. So as I'm going through someone's report, this will be up to you. You might just look at it on screen. I'm very old-fashioned about things. I actually like to have a printed version, which I have in front of me, and then I scribble all over it, because I find that that's really more helpful for me, so that I can make my little notes and pick up on particular things that I want to go through. If we're looking at this, we want to look at what is the pattern. Now here we've got something, in that case the team role is implementer, which is quite a bit higher. And we've then got another couple of team roles which are relatively high as well. And it's not that I'm saying what percentile are they, but as we can see, they are 60th percentile and above in this case for these top three. And then it's kind of stepped down. But we know that we are going to have a certain type of person, and if you look at this, what do you notice? I'm sorry, this is where you would call out if we were in a group, but those top three, the implementer, then the completer finisher, and then the shaper. We've got someone who is all action. It's task. And there's the structure of the task, and there's also the wanting to have things just right, and then the wanting to drive it on, being sure what that end result is, and let's move there quickly. So when I start with this caveat, it's going to, I'm assuming here that you will have explained team roles to the person in advance. Either that has been something that they know about anyway, like a program I'm working on at the moment, where I'm having, I had everyone together where we talked about the roles, and then individual coaching sessions. Then we're all going to come together as a team, or they're all going to come together as a team, and I'm facilitating next week. But if that's not the case, if you're going straight into the one-to-one, it really is worth, and people will get a lot more from it if they have a little bit of an understanding. And as you know, on the with all of the reports, there's always the list of team roles of the strengths and allowable weaknesses printed out. I know people can read that themselves, but I do think that you elaborating a little on what these roles are about, and maybe looking at, we keep saying these categories, would be useful. But I am making an assumption as I go through this that you will have explained the team roles to people, so they'll have some basic idea of what you're talking about there. So what you've got is...
Sorry, can I interrupt? I'm ever so sorry.
Interrupt as many times as you wish, Jo, of course.
So you would also give the reports beforehand, so, or would you wait? Would this be the first time an individual had seen the Belbin report, or would you have given them the Belbin report before the session?
That's a very, very good question, and I don't have a particular answer to that. Sometimes people will have it, I mean, sometimes they've had it quite a long time before. I don't actually recommend that if you can avoid it, but sometimes it's been the day before or a couple of hours before to give people time to reflect on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Sometimes it's true that it's I've given it to someone in the session, and usually that has been where there are some things about it which I think might be really concerning to the person, and depending on the context. Sorry, what I'm thinking about here is one where I knew the person was a little fragile, and I was a bit worried about some of the information that has come out, and I wanted to be in the room. So I gave the report, I sat quietly while that person was able to read through, and then we talked about it. So I could actually see the reactions. But I would say probably if you have got a choice, then maybe for the person to have it sort of an hour before you have your session. So they've had time to read it, they can make a few notes, and they can have some questions they want to ask you.
Perfect, thank you. I think there's something I've learned how to do the chat at the same time. Some people are saying actually sometimes they like to go through it together and have the reflection afterwards.
Yes.
Which would be interesting. Somebody else has said, and I think we're going to come and answer this question actually with the other pages, but I'll mention it anyway, is how do you find out if the dominant behaviour is the one that the individual enjoys or not? Because I don't think this is quite common. Sometimes our dominant behaviour is something we know we have to play. It's almost like acting sometimes, isn't it? It may not be something we necessarily enjoy, but we know it's needed. So how do we find that out? And then people have already answered that one. Ask them, I suppose, at this point.
Yeah.
Is it something that makes your heart sing? Is it something that you enjoy doing? Somebody else has said, I thought that you'd be using the highest score as 100% reference and then calculating the others accordingly. Well, Michael, what we have for each of these team roles is you are measured against a norm database of 9,500 people, and it's a percentile score based to that norm-based population. So if somebody's in the hundreds, that means that nobody scores any higher than you for that particular team role. Here we have somebody in the 75th percentile, which means that 25% of that population score higher. So it's not relative to you as an individual, it's relative to a norm population, which is so important because you may think, well, it's just my top role, but actually it may not be high compared to others. So it's always looking for that area. Perfect.
Absolutely, no, that's vital. And to say that the other thing is you can have any pattern. So for some people, they will have something even at the 100th percentile. I mean, we do get a few like that. Or it might be that the first team role is really high, the top team role is really high. Other things are very much lower, and you get a very clear idea of what you're likely to experience from that person, because that means that it's not one team role which usually is influenced strongly by their second, third, sometimes fourth team role, but it's just there. The other thing is that for some people, the pattern is quite flat. Now, what does that mean? And we'll go on to this when we're looking at self-perception as well, because this part, as you will see, is the self-perception plus the observers. And we don't know from this, there may be big differences or there may be some similarities, but what you're wanting to do is, again, it's asking the person from seeing this, from their understanding of those roles, and from seeing this, has it surprised them? Is it what they were expecting? If that, and well, of course, they will have formed their own questions, and they might well say to you, well, you know, is this the question I'm asked a lot? Is this usual? Do most people have this? And of course, there's not really an answer to that. There's not a particular pattern that we always see. But just to be that first step of eliciting, I'm going to be honest and say I don't spend a lot of time on this at the beginning. If I'm working within a team, then I get people to use this when they're sharing and moving around the room. But on the one-to-one, I very often have it, but I want to go straight to other pages. Just a quick reminder, most of you who are, well, I hope all of you who are accredited will remember this, but just to say that where we've got whole paragraphs in italics, then that means they are general. So Jo has got this written on hers, I've got it written on mine. These are general things when they're in italics there.
Yeah.
And
I think
yeah.
Sorry, Deborah, just to say, we've got a few questions coming in. Some of them are quite general Belbin questions. So I'll probably answer those at the end, if that's okay, just because otherwise we're not going to get through this report. So we've got lots of questions. Unless they're specifically on this page, I'm going to ask if you don't mind if we answer them at the end, because otherwise we will be here till midnight. But I didn't want people to feel that I was ignoring them, because I'm really not. Perfect. And as you always say, Deborah, with this particular report, what you always say, I'm speaking over you now, I do apologise, is it's not a book. Your Belbin report is not a book to start at page 1 to go through to page 13. It's working out which page is going to be most useful for that particular person that you're coaching.
Yes.
Go through it first, work out where do you think is going to be the most useful starting point, because it may not be this page. This page may not even be shown. It depends where it is that the conversation obviously goes. Right, I'm going to go on to the next page, Deborah, because I'm being a shaper.
Oh, no, not at all. Because in fact, I had we were going to use another slide that actually said that, but then thought, you know, there's too many words. But it really was, I think, top tip is just don't, as Jo said, don't just go through it. And in terms of where you start, you might be led by your clients, because if when you say to your client, you've had to look at this, what are questions, they might go straight in, well, I was really worried about these words, then start there. Or what does it mean if? Start there. You might, and what I quite often do, in fact, is I start with the self-perception, and then I build up the narrative. So let's look first at the self-perception, and then look at what the observers were saying, and then what's that as a combination. So really don't have just one place that you start. Just go with what feels right, and we know it's about that flexibility, because your whole approach is going to be influenced by the individual and also you, of course. So right, we have now started to get to a bit of it, sort of deeper content. Having said that, I wouldn't usually go through it in this order. I am probably going to here, just so that it's for understanding. What we've got on the left-hand side for Sue is we can look at similarities and differences. Now, we can see that there's quite a lot of similarity. We don't have a particular amount, you know, so percentile difference that we would be focusing on here. But of course, key question is, what does Sue feel about this or think about this? I would say probably I wouldn't use feelings word so much with Sue, given the action nature. But what does she think? What are her comments? What are the questions that she might have from this? And it's rather important that you'll find someone will focus on something that's quite a way down very often. So if you've got, say, coordinator here, Sue didn't see herself as coordinator at all. Well, you can see it's a tiny amount. I can't even quite work out the percentile. Can't quite see from there. I'm sorry, it's a slightly fuzzy one, rather than referring to these. So she saw only the 8th percentile. And other people saw a little more. So they, in fact, had seen 43rd percentile. And so where we've got that difference, then I have had people in these sorts of sessions saying, oh, but look, other people were seeing me like that. Well, yes, they were. It's true. They collectively, her observers have seen more of the coordinator than Sue thought was in herself. But it's still relatively low. So we don't want to be focusing on that. We don't want to ignore it, but we don't want to focus on it. Because apart from observer 1, if we're looking over at the right-hand side, most people didn't see that particularly strongly. A couple of people did see it in the middle, others saw it nearer to the bottom. But we want to make sure that we don't get derailed by focusing on, okay, here's differences, but they're right down at that end. So here, you would particularly be looking at of course, the specialist is the really obvious one, where Sue has got a lot more of that for herself than other people were seeing. So asking why that might be, but in fact, it's really most useful, I think, where you see this in relation to the page on the right, and that's why we put them together on the slide, because I think having these 2 pages, and if you're using physical bits of paper with the person rather than the split screens, actually have both, get the person to have both of those in front of them. If you're doing it when you're sitting next to them, fine. If you're doing it remotely, fine. You know, they can look at both of those, and reminding someone that the bar graph that we have on the left, kind of, you're really looking at that top, the line on the left being the self-perception. Turn it round, you know, that's the self-perception line that you've got right at the top. And then your line of observers, that's the overall observers' views line. And then we're looking at both of those, as you know, this is on the right-hand side now, but both of those to look at that overall composition. And just a quick reminder there, because with each of these, I think it's like reminder as well as the questions you're going to ask, but a reminder for you when you're wanting to explain this is that there is a higher weighting on the observers than there is on the self. So you've got that combination there. And here is where there's lots of room for discussion and questions. So you're wanting to find out, who are these observers? What are the working relationships that Sue has with them? And the other thing to think about, or to get Sue to think about, is what kind of a person is, let's say, observer 1. So it's about the working relationship with them, but also if observer 1 is someone who looks at the world from the perspective of, let's say, a specialist themselves, then maybe if they see any little bits of behaviour that's perhaps broader in scope and a little bit more generalist, they're going to think of that, and they're going to mark that more highly. So it's absolutely vital that you've asked those questions and that the person has reflected. Does it make sense that someone has seen me more in this light than that light? And you know, this is one you'll see that you've got a bit of information on each of these pages. You have a green box at the top of the page, and don't ignore it, because the green box is actually telling you, but also helping your coachee when they go away to be reminded of what that whole page is about. And here underneath, it's already telling you there is a good match here, but we know that it's not absolute. So when we're then going back to the left-hand side, to that specialist, where Sue had a lot more of it than other people, it might be worth looking at where other people had seen it. Now, the majority of those people had seen it either in the middle or relative, or really low, or relatively low. So that itself is saying something, and you want to explore what that's about. And of course, someone's just popped up with, it depends if there's agreement or disagreement with the observers. Yes, of course, that's vital. You are looking at, and those of you who are accredited will know, we've got that we would be looking at whether there's similarities amongst the observers, whether we're getting that body of evidence where there's lots of similarities, or whether everyone's seeing the person slightly differently. And of course, then that has less weight to it. But I scribble all over this. I find this is the one that I particularly draw lines on and go through and talk about that with the person. So, Jo, could we have the next slide for just?
You can. I'm multitasking at the moment. Sorry.
Oh, right. Are there particular
no,
questions?
it's fine. Otherwise, we're not. Yes, that's fine. Let's have a look at this next page. So I think this is really useful. How you use this. Really useful.
Time. I might actually move through them a little bit more quickly, but I think this page is so vital for you to be using for those questions, getting the person to think about. Now, what I like to do, and what I recommend for the person to do themselves, is put these lines, 3 lines between the first 3, middle 3, bottom 3. Your eye can see patterns more easily in 3s. It doesn't mean we're only looking at the top 3, but it means that we can see patterns much more easily. And then, I mean, use whatever you want. If you're using highlighters and colors, or sometimes I use pretty patterns, you know, I do circles around some and triangles around others. But looking at the pattern here, if we look at the red, the shaper, we can now see that, yes, there's some similarities amongst the observers, but there's also observer 5 is not seeing shaper within that person at all, which is why it's important that you have got the person to think about the relationship and whether that's going to be making sense. It's also why we have a minimum of 4 observers, so that with this, the fact that you've got one person who's got a particular team role low, it doesn't skew the whole thing. And remember, this is ranked order. This is not saying the amount of the number of points, as it were, that each person gave on shaper. So now look, the implementer, you can see, you know, you've got a number of people who are seeing a lot of that and a couple of people who aren't. But I'm just reminding myself here, it was actually person 4, if you're interested, who's the manager of this woman. And so, you know, that really matters. Who is the manager? Who are clients or internal clients, or who are my colleagues? So you're going to be really delving down into this in quite some detail. And also, I'd recommend do the same at the end as well. Do the same at the bottom. And I think that's the best way round. Can we move on to the next page? I know
Yes,
there's a few questions there, but I think if we just move on, cover these for now. Thank you. Here we've got the self-perception on the left-hand side, and this is, again, you might want to start with this, as I mentioned earlier. I often do, because I get the person to, in most cases, people agree with what they've said to themselves about themselves, occasionally not, but this one is interesting. You've got 3 in the preferred, the manageable, and the least preferred. That doesn't happen so often, but where someone has been quite definite about things, and in this case where she's got implementer really quite strongly, and then her completer finisher, but that specialist which others weren't picking up on. So why? We want to know, what does she see in herself as the specialist that other people are not picking up on? And why are they not picking up on it? So is that we would always want to check out. Sorry, what I'm doing, and it will be right, Jo, I must keep looking down at the chat boxes, because I
stop it.
I get slightly distracted. Yes, indeed, easily done. So what we're talking about here with these the top role that other people weren't seeing, I really want to have an understanding of why. What was this about? Now, in fact, for this particular person, it was that in the job, she'd been with the company a long time. She'd been in a job previously where she was regarded as the specialist. In this regulatory affairs area, everyone has to be quite specialist to some degree, and there were people who knew more. It turned out that this was creating some problems for her. And I think because of that, there were real issues, because she wanted to be seen as the fount of all knowledge. And it was very frustrating for her that she wasn't. So you're going to be focusing on that and using that to drag things out. Right, now the wordy page, I think what we'll do, because I'm keeping an eye on time and there's some pages that we really need to ask lots of questions about. So I'm going to say that on this one, it's about asking the person if that, how that sounds for them. Is that ringing true? Are there things they want to be reminded of? And for you, of course, remember, it's based most often on the top, largely the top 2 roles, and then the third role. The bottom paragraph is always what's come in 9th place, and that is based on self and observers. But of course, going back to those original questions we asked. Jo, next page, please, and I'll talk a bit quicker.
Okay, I'll just say actually this page I love. Pearl, who we had for a webinar a few weeks ago, actually says she describes this as your own personal letter from Meredith Belbin. Oh, I think that's a lovely way of positioning it. Anyway, move on.
Yeah, lovely.
Okay, so you've got maximising your potential and feedback and development suggestions. Now, these are all made up of bullet points. So this is where you start getting some real difference coming in, isn't it? This isn't just based on your top 2 or your bottom role at all. This is where really it's saying where, you know, are particular elements of your behaviour coming through on both of these pages, backed up or not with your observers, obviously. So, Deborah, what are the key points here?
Key points on this, I would say, is getting the person looking at the left-hand side and those paragraphs of your self-perception and how to play better to your strengths. And in this one in particular, as we said, specialist wasn't being seen by other people, and that mattered to her that it wasn't. So what's she going to do about that? Are there ways that she can then use this report with just a starting point of how to play the role of specialist more effectively, or how to display that to other people? So that's something really worth looking at and quite important to focus on. Jo, you're about to say something.
I would just say this is the key thing. This is where it comes to my coordinator, actually, because my set self-perception inventory, I've got coordinator as my second role. Resource investigator is my third role. But actually, people in the office don't see it as highly. So this, for me, would be where I'd have some top tips of how to play my coordinator role to better effect. But the great thing about Belbin is that you can, when you're coaching, it's not just a one-off, is it? It's an ongoing process. And when you coach, you help the individual set targets, help them decide of their plan going forward. And of course, you can repeat this. So after a period of, say, 6 months to a year, perhaps you would like to repeat the Belbin process, and you will see whether or not the observers have actually seen more, in Sue's case, of the specialist role, or in my case, seen more of the coordinator role. Because you would have had a plan in action to do so, and it's measurable. And that's what's so beautiful, is that you can come back to it and have a constant coaching conversation. But let's go on to the other pages.
Most definitely. I think that's vital. On the right-hand side, this was actually designed to be used with your line manager or your coach. So use that. It actually, I think, speaks for itself. It's suggesting to you how you might go about questioning, or what might you ask. It's actually saying, you know, that she may have this capacity for self-organization, maybe some doubt. So, you know, you're wanting to check that out and look at the work context as well. And, you know, when we've got what other people are looking at, ask Sue, you know, what do you think about that? Others have said that you might be best suited to work where there's a need for dependability, and then have this right next to the page with words, which we'll go on to in just a second. But I think the other thing there is, sorry, just looking at some sort of a little bullet on here that I wanted to say, where you've got advice there, which is, you're not wanting to give too much advice because you want to keep it open, but whether someone has got the things that they want to show other people that they're not showing often enough. So if we flip onto the words, onto the next page, please.
My favourite pages.
No, absolutely. No, mine too. These are really rich for discussion.
Oh, wonderful.
Aren't they? And so what we can now use, and I think, again, these two together are very useful, that we want to tap in with the page we saw before and that list of observer words, because where we saw, for example, sorry, Jo, can you just flip back again for one moment? I just want people to remember reliable.
Oh, no, I can't.
Okay.
No, it's not letting me.
Okay. Now we can't go back at all.
No,
Okay.
it's fine. I can try and do it, but keep talking.
Oh, thank you. I will. So
Yes, we can.
that's it. That's fabulous. So
There we go.
where you've got on the right-hand side, other than that, now when you're wanting to say to Sue, you know, how do you feel about this? That is generated, being dependable is generated by the first word that came up on the next page. So if we now flip, so just have those in mind and then flip, we can see reliable, you see. So then the efficient, those words are making a lot of sense, and, well, are they making sense to her, but we can understand why the information's come about. And the report on the right-hand side was based on 6 observers. So therefore, it's really, really important to pick up on. You could have a maximum of 12 points for anything. So the fact that you've had 9 observers giving 9 ticks or 8 ticks, 7 ticks is very significant. So I'm skipping between the two here because I think using these in conjunction is very useful, but let's just go back for a moment to the left-hand side. I don't know about you, but this is the one that people often feel they understand the least. So my clients often want more of an explanation of this and want to understand it more. So as you will remember, a lot of you, that you're not looking at one line of this diagram really in relation to another. We're not looking at comparing those. We're looking at each line against itself. So we're looking at the amount of positive and negative. And on that, if we look at the specialist, so I know someone's raised a hand, I'll just finish this bit, but on this, where we've got the specialist, for example, which is the team role that Sue really believes she has and others aren't seeing, well, they were seeing less of it than she saw in herself. And look at it, they were seeing relatively quite a lot of the negative of that. So that's something which you're going to work with Sue on. What's that about? Is it because she thinks they're not seeing it, she's trying harder and then you're getting the negative? Or are they things that she's just simply not aware of? So where you have got plenty on the right-hand side relative to the left, of course, you're going to be asking those more general questions again, but wanting to link it in. And I'm keeping an eye on the time here as well. I'm going on to the right-hand side because what I would like you to do, you can see where we've got the high numbers. And again, I write notes all over it. You will see that the words in italics, as we know, are the weaknesses words. And what we've got there is that she's coming up as someone who is territorial, and that I'm looking on here because I've got my words more easy to read, engrossed in own area. So that's not going to be very helpful. If she is wanting to display more of this specialist in the positive, then you're going to be working with her on her trying to have strategies for that. So the other key points I want to make about this page of words and phrases deliberately does not have the team role right next to it. And it's vital that it doesn't.
Absolutely.
Of course, you will know a lot of these. You will understand that, reliable is very much about being an implementer. But it's very important because quite often, and this is a key thing with my clients, I find, that quite often they don't like the idea of a particular role because perhaps culturally or whatever. So they don't particularly want that, or they don't see themselves in that light, but they relate to people seeing that behavior. So what you're going to ask is, do you think there are times when people would have seen you being reliable, efficient? What are the examples of? What are the times when? And then going on to the negative words too. Why do you think they might have said that? Are there times when? So really delving in deeply. And it's important as well because sometimes people have words high at the top and they're not that role. And I'm going to use Nigel Belbin as a quick example here.
I did check, he says it's fine.
I was hoping you wouldn't listen anyway. So
no, he's just there actually. He could listen to every word. So I thought I'd just say that.
But no, Joe knows this because I mean, it's just near the top of his words is caring.
Top
and
word.
He is at the very top now.
Top.
Okay, this top. Okay, and he is, to the people who work for him, one of the most caring people you could imagine. Caring does relate to team worker. He has got no other team worker word used. In fact, we laugh about it because if he needs something to be sort of diplomatically written, he'll say, "Oh, Deborah, would you have a quick look at this?" Or Joe, have it. So even though we haven't got team worker high, we're much more diplomatic than him. So it can sometimes skew things or just give people a different impression. So using these words to really get to the detail of the behaviours is a key thing to do. And by the way, often people will say, "Oh, why is it no one said?" And you don't, trying to get them not to focus on the zeros. Although,
and also the ones, Deborah, actually.
Yeah, the ones.
The ones, I've had somebody once within a team session get completely fixated that one person said that they were, I forget what the word was now, I don't know, fussy. One person said fussy, and that spoilt it entirely because that's all that this person then focused in on. You're looking at, with all things with Belbin, you're looking at generalities, aren't you? And you're asking the questions to see whether or not the understanding is there. I'm just going to say at this point, we are overrunning slightly, but I don't want Deborah to talk any quicker because then nobody will understand a word she's saying. If you need to go now, this is absolutely fine. You will be sent a recording. So don't feel that you have to be awfully polite and everything and stay right to the bitter end. Please, we will send you a recording. We've only got a couple of more slides to go, to be honest with you. So it's not going to be that much longer. But I just thought I ought to acknowledge the fact that we are overrunning slightly. Personally, these 2 pages, Deborah, I love because it's giving an indication of so much. And I know also with the one on the left hand side, the observed team role strengths and weaknesses, somebody once said to me, if you see that there are no weaknesses whatsoever, that's where you need to start asking questions, because we all have weaknesses. We all have them. And is this an indication of the culture where nobody dares say anything? Nobody wants to say anything because they're 2 very different things. Or is somebody just working so hard to try and hide their weaknesses that actually they're not playing so fully to their strengths? So as a coach, there's some great questions to ask, some really open questions, ones that we talked about right at the very beginning about this. If there are no weaknesses, here you should start really thinking, and why is that? Next page.
No, and yes, next page, but just going on to what you said, Joe, because I think it was me that said that actually, but I'm sure lots of people have, but there was one in particular where I had, just with each of the people, there were not weaknesses. And when we looked at it more closely, it was because it was a culture where people were scared and were really just felt that if they said anything that was negative. So this person, in fact, not Sue that we're talking about, where I was going back to, they hadn't felt able to put any of the weaknesses that other people had either. So that wasn't healthy. But sometimes, you know, pick up on this as well. You'll have people saying, "Oh, I thought there would be more words saying I was impatient or whatever." And then, but that in itself, although it's not on the report, why do you think they might have said that? Well, if you think you are like that, what are you going to do about it? So really, this is, from this, we'd get the what are you going to do? And this is where you get people to have their own strategies for being able to, perhaps, with this person, Sue, what we'd done was we looked at that territorial, what it meant, and she actually came up with some ways, bit of guidance, but some ways that worked for her to try to, in fact, show others a little bit. So when she did learn something, because that's what she liked doing, she was going to try and share it so that they saw that she was sharing, but also they get to see more of that specialist side of her. Yeah, last page, please, Jo.
Before we do so, very good question. With proportion to the weaknesses to the strengths, looking at those bar graphs, where do the alarm bells ring?
Okay. Well, for me, there's not an absolute. Certainly, if it's 50-50, I'm really concerned. But I'm going to say that in real coaching mode, I actually think if there's more than 1/3 negative to strength, then it's starting to not look very balanced, and therefore I see it as a really good place to have the discussion and to try to work with the person to minimize that.
So about 1/3. Yeah, I think I'd go with you. I think that's where I sort of start looking at things. Yeah, absolutely. I also would just say as well, just don't concentrate too much on the really tiny bars. Because it could be, you know, it's you're looking again at the general ones. You're looking at where they, you know, the strengths are really there as well. Okay, sorry. Next page, Deborah.
Last page. No, sorry. I'm so sorry that we've.
Stop apologising. It's interesting.
Yeah, because we've. There we go. Let's just look at this.
Most people are still here, Deborah. It's okay.
Okay, great. This page for me is one which just sometimes I've had people who are not happy with the whole report. You know, it happens. I don't think I'm not sure about this. But interestingly, this page, very often I get this sort of line of, oh, well, yeah, well, I mean, I can see that. Yes, that is how it is with the work I'm doing at the moment. So what you want to focus on here, the questions that you'll ask here are, does this relate well to the work you are doing at the moment? If not, why not? But the majority of times I've found that it does. And what you want is to, of course, see, I'm not just one role, I'm not just two roles, but this is looking at the mix of four. So sometimes with this woman, you know, she really related to this, although she did want a bit more of the applying knowledge part, which was, of course, with the implementer and the specialist. Not surprisingly, that's how she'd seen her self-perception. But the fact that that came into play, as well as these quality processes, as well as, yes, assigning tasks. So looking at those clusters, it's that the top 4 team roles. And remember, if you've got the team roles really high, it's all 4 of them. But even if you have something where the top 2 are high, and then the next 2 come really quite a lot lower down, it will still take the top 4. So it's always, under any circumstances, it's going to be those top 4. And it's about getting someone to think, of course they wouldn't use those exact phrases, but often that helps people to understand. And I find that then using that and talking about their work and how they want to be seen in their job, we then go back to some of those other pages. And I find that sometimes from this, and then looking at the list of words, we can really elicit some useful things. And, okay, if I want to be seen a bit more in this light than that light, the specific things that I might try and do are. And of course, this is not the webinar to do this, but we've got all this information about styles, communication styles, and how to relate to particular team roles. And that's what you want to use as well. You know, here's the report, but actually you want all those other things. How best do I communicate with an implementer? And therefore, as someone pointed out right at the beginning, but I absolutely agree with you, but use that. So use the other information we have, the documentation we have, the handouts. And for the person, when you're going through this coaching process, what's wonderful is then to give them a form that we have, template that we have for getting the best out of your report. And I see that as a way of a person continuing their sort of self-coaching, or actually using it to work on and then come back to you for your next coaching session, so that you are looking at this was just the very first step, really, and we need to go on from there. I think I should stop. I've talked.
No, that's fine, Deborah. There's actually, Phil Mary's just said this page is really useful when looking at alternative roles for mid-career leaders who are bored with what they are doing. I love that. Yes. Crikey, who could be bored? Who? Surely no. I think this is really useful here. And actually earlier on, We have the wonderful, we have a wonderful Belbin worldwide community. We have Beatra from Belbin, South Africa as well, just making a point that you can use the individual report as here alongside. We also have Belbin job reports, and the Belbin job reports are ones that are looking at a job in terms of the Belbin team or behaviours that are required. And so what you can do is actually have them alongside one another when coaching.
Yeah.
So looking at the individual, this could be the job that you want. This could be your ideal job. This is you now. What is the journey to be able to, fulfill that? What do you need to do? What do you need to learn, etc. But there's quite a few things there which you can use with a range of different Belbin reports. Okay, Deborah, we have gone through an individual report there very much with a coaching hat on. And I think, as you said right at the very beginning, it's not for us to give people the answers. It's for us as coaches to be able to ask the questions so that others can get their aha moments. It's to get others to be able to discover themselves about their behaviours at work. And I think this is where Belbin comes into its own, is this crucial element of how other people are seeing your behaviours. It's really validating what you think, and those questions that you can ask, and the real richness of conversation that you can then have using these is really fabulous. I was only half paying attention at the end, Deborah. You said that we would be giving out some handouts or some...
No, I was just meaning that people could go to our website to get some things.
I suddenly realised you were saying something. And because this isn't something just a one-off, is it? This needs to be a journey. Now, this is quite an interesting one. I will send out a couple of handouts which are quite useful in the email. It's also got everything else that I've promised in there. But I don't know about you, Deborah, but I've been going to a heck of a lot of these webinars recently. And I realise we're missing a trick, because there's normally at least 20 minutes of product placement at the end of most of these webinars. We don't tend to do that. We should do. We don't. We're missing out there. Of course, all of this information, etc., would be available to you if you do attend an accreditation course, if you become Belbin accredited, and we're now doing this all online. The depth that you can get from these reports, you will really be able to explore, and also be able to show people that you are officially Belbin accredited, which just gives you that depth of knowledge to be able to use these reports in such a wonderful capacity. Nobody will ever be as good as Deborah, just going to say that now. We've got manage expectations here, but to be able to really use these reports. So please do have a look at our various training courses, and yes, I will put a link to that also on the email that we will send up. Wow.
Jo, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. No, I'm so sorry. I just thought, linking into what you were saying there, in a way, this feels a bit frustrating for me, because we have, we've whizzed through and we've really just touched some of the questions you might ask. There is there's just so much more that that you can go through, even just with some basic questions and things. Yeah. So it would be wonderful if people did either come to the accreditation, as you say, or we can look at perhaps doing something which is a little bit more in depth on some aspects, depending on people's responses. So let us know what you're interested in.
Absolutely. We might even be able to do a half-day coaching online training course or something, Deborah. If people are interested, we're quite happy for suggestion, So thank you so much for everybody for attending today. If you've got any questions, just put them in there. We're going to stay around for a few minutes anyway to answer them, but we really appreciate your time. We hope you're finding these webinars useful. We've got another one very soon with the wonderful Philip Merry, looking at synchronicity. So please do look for that. That's going to be fascinating. I will be doing no talking, because I'm just going to be listening and absorbing. And then we also have another one planned with Patrick Ballon, who will be looking at leadership within the team, which is again going to be a really interesting one. So please do keep up to date with our emails, etc., that we send out, to make sure you don't miss anything, because it would be such a shame. But if you do, don't worry, they are all on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much indeed for your time today. You can take your coach's hat off now, but you know what questions to ask when you put it back on. So Deborah, thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you all. It's been good to be here.
Okay, any more questions that we need to answer?
Yes.
Questions. Oh, crikey, I keep scrolling. There were so many, Deborah. I do apologise.
No, I'd love to have been able to, that we could deal with some and answer. So if there's people still here to ask now.
Okay. If anybody is still here who'd really like your question answered, please just type it in. Otherwise, we're going to go through some of the older ones, which we didn't have a chance to answer before. Yeah, how do you find out if a dominant behaviour is something that the individual enjoys or not? I think it's just a case of asking, isn't it? It's asking questions. This may be your top role, but this is what that top role is. A bit more explanation about the team role. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Is the role that you're playing at the moment making your heart sing? Are you engaged? You've got that wonderful data, haven't you, from Gallup about levels of engagement? Because we could be playing a role which we absolutely hate, and we just go home and we just zonk on the sofa and dread the next day. So we need to ask questions. What do you think, Deborah?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, someone asked that at the beginning, and I wrote it down, intending that we would talk about it. But in fact, I'm afraid there wasn't quite time. I think that what's interesting, and I did have kind of behind the scenes another report if we'd had time, but where in fact someone had come up very high in a role seen by other people, so it's come high on his profile, and it wasn't something that he especially made his heart sing, to use your expression. He didn't really get a lot from it. He wasn't being fed by it, but he said, it's exactly what I need at the moment. So I'm just looking at his at the report here now. It's because he needed to respond in a particular way. He needed to be doing something, taking a hit, sacrificing. Yeah. So it came up high, but it wasn't especially what he enjoyed.
How long is our coaching sessions normally, Deborah? Thank you, Pinky.
I would say usually about an hour. I mean, it does vary. Yeah. It does vary. But because I'm doing more online, I think that I would say people have, it depends, let's say they've had chance to read it before, they'd have perhaps an hour before have their report, and then we would spend an hour. But then there's work. I would actually ask them to then answer questions for themselves, come up with strategies. What are they going to do? Then we'll meet up again and discuss those and take it to the next step. Yeah. So it's actions all the time. What are the actions coming out of this?
And I think, as Phil Murray has said here as well, it's starting that journey, isn't it? So he uses a 6-month coaching contract where you start with the leader, and you can do that cholesterol check, have the things that I said I would work on, have they actually been seen by others 6 months later? So to see whether or not that work has actually transitioned into actions that have been visible from other people. So it's very rare, isn't it, that you have a one-off coaching session. It's something which is an ongoing conversation, because you can't change everything in an hour. Although I prefer that, because I'm quite high shaper, obviously.
Well, I would say that when it's a one-off, it tends more to be perhaps a feedback session with a little bit of coaching element. And often it's like the program I was talking about, but then it's because you're then having everyone together as a team. So they've wanted to be reflecting on some things individually, and then you bring them together as a team.
That's an interesting one, actually. Would you have the coaching session on a one-to-one before you bring the team together? Or would you have the team session first and then do the coaching afterwards?
I do both. And, okay. And I wouldn't say that one is right and the other is wrong. But probably I like to do both. In an ideal world, I'd have a bit of a team session and we cover everything, and then you can really explain team roles well. You can explain about opposites, you can explain about the 3 categories. Then people have time to reflect on their own report, give an example of a report so they've understood it in general, read their own, and then you have those one-to-one sessions, and then you all come back together 2 days later or whenever it is for the team session to really build on what people have learnt individually, and hopefully then put into practice some of the things they were working on.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we had somebody who worked in the office a while ago, and they always say what you don't want to have is a wheelbarrow of Belbin that you just go up to a team and go, there you go, and then you walk off again. That's kind of not what you're after. It's a process, and you're constantly working aren't you, with it, the team or the individuals, the leader, everything else. It's a layering effect, isn't it, to try and, you know, as a whole, to get those changes if needed. I love what Phil's put there. He's put, actually, Jo, you can change people fundamentally in 1 minute. Wow. Right, Phil, I look forward to our conversation. You know, I'm going to come back a changed woman, which may be a good thing. Right, well, I think we've done all the questions now. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I need a cup of tea. Deborah probably needs a cup of tea too. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you again very, very soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.